Oh,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another round of Freakopolis's Creator Talks. We're very excited for today's Creator Talk. We have with us the creators of Paradiso, Ramv and Dev Promanik. Issue 1 is in stores now. The staff really love this introduction to this really cool book they've created, and we're super excited to have the creators here with us. So, hey, guys.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, cool.
yeah, it's exciting to be here.
So I think we can start off. Can you guys give our audience, as it were, a sort of pitch for Paradiso?
Yeah, Paradiso is basically a post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure, which features our protagonist's journey through a sentient city, set in a world where this cataclysmic event known as the Midnight has kind of ended civilization everywhere but inside Paradiso. And so Paradiso has become this kind of mecca for survivors all over as they try to make their way into this mysterious and magical city. And they all have their own legends about it and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's a lot of words. Sci-fi.
Sorry?
Apocalypse. I said that's a lot of...
Yeah. Well, the easiest way I can explain it is if you played SimCity, imagine the city was the player and your lives were being manipulated by it.
Gotcha. Ooh, all right. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you guys think you can get us up to speed with like your career in comics and how you came to work together as a team of creators?
Yeah, sure. So Dave and I first kind of knew of each other because we were both working in the indie comics scene.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave was actually kind of a little bit more experienced than I was because I used to be a chemical engineer until 2012 or so. And I kind of jumped into writing comics and, just went over to a convention that was there in India and started pitching ideas and stuff. But basically, we knew of each other, but we had never worked with each other then. And then I moved to the UK and I worked on a sort of graphic novel called Black Mamba, which I kickstarted and self-published. And that was crime noir stories, but set in a magic realist Mumbai. And so while I was working on that, Dave and I had already started talking about possibly doing work with each other. And I went, how'd you like to do a gritty, dirty, inky crime story set in Mumbai? And Dave was like, yeah, bring it on, we'll do it. And that book did really well. And as we were finishing the last story of Black Mamba, and I knew it was going to be a cool book, and Dave and I had sort of hit it off in terms of collaborations.
Sure.
That's when I went to him and I said, you know what, we should do something longer. That's not just, 2 short stories in a book. And Dave was like, yeah, let's do it. So I think that was somewhere around 2016 that Black Mamba came out. We had a few pages done for a pitch. And then I knew Eric Stevenson from Image when he was down at Thought Bubble in 2016. And a year later, we've got Paradiso coming out.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dave.
It's almost like Ram said. I started out when I was in college. I went to engineering college, and around the middle of my year, we have a 4-year course, and from the second year on, I started taking on Indian comic projects, right? And from there on, I kept working and working till I kept getting more work. And slowly I started to diversify. I got offers to do comics from abroad. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? The pay was better. And it was also, I could also work on a lot, on a variety of stuff. And then me and Ram started talking. I think he was still in India, yeah. And we always looked at each other's work, and he was like, yeah, I'm doing some cool stuff here. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And I would show him my work. He would show me some of his scripts. I would read some of the books he put out, and would then show him some of the books I put out, and we had that mutual thing going. And then after college, I went on to do like freelance work, and that's when I got my first gig. I think I worked with Graphic India for a while, but after that, I got my first gig with like Boom, working on Nightbreed, and I did that for a while. And I think during that time was when Ram came to me with Black Mamba. I was working on Black Mamba a little before, like the first story, a little around that time, and then we finished that, and then Ram told me about Paradiso, and the rest is as Ram told you. Like we just started working on it, and then he showed it to Eric Stephenson, and now we are on the book.
Yeah, cool. I am a little curious. What's the Indian comic scene like? Is it mostly digital? Is there like comic shops in nearby?
So I think the biggest thing that we decry about the Indian comic scene is the lack of comic shops. There's no like, I mean, there's a lot of intent and there's a lot of talent. Like, so there are creators, there are readers, there are publishers, which is mostly just like two guys who are really interested in making comics, But there's surprisingly cool work coming out of that kind of a small niche group. But none of that work ever makes it to like being viable for the creators because there's no like distribution, there's no sales channels for it, if you will. So the only way really to get an Indian comic out is to go to an international publisher and have them publish the comic and then bring it back to India, which is kind of weird. But really, that's how the bigger books get made. Everything else still tends to be on a very sort of niche indie level, if you will. But I mean, look at these guys. Look at guys like Dave and a couple of others that I'm working with. These guys are incredibly talented and absolutely deserve for their work to be seen on a bigger platform.
Absolutely.
And it's like weird because I think I've noticed that like there's no single issue stores in India. Like you never see a single issue. There's no single issue market in India. Right. Everything, you go to these big book outlets like Starmark or Crosswords, and all you get are TPBs. You get like collections, and there's no way to stay updated on any comics. You can't go to a store and be like, yeah, I want this month's book. You can't. Even Indian, I don't think there are stores which give you like single issue books of Indian comics. Right. Like, you can buy it off their sites, but I don't think there are shops dedicated to that.
Yeah.
That needs to be really addressed. Like you cannot like make people aware of comics unless you have a store that caters to that on a regular basis. Unless like there's like children or young adults going to the stores, even adults, I don't care. They go into a store and they're like, yeah, I want this month's book. There's nothing like that in India.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So essentially, you go to the store and there's volume 2, and you're like, what? Where was this all in between? Like volume 1.
Yeah. Also, it becomes really hard to sort of get the volumes right away. Like, someone will be on issue 20, and the first volume will just have become available in India at that point.
I've yet to see
so everyone's kind of playing catch up.
Yeah, I have yet to see an Image TPB out I have very rarely seen an Image TPB out in any Indian outlet. Like only Marvel and DC and that kind of stuff.
The big two.
Hopefully that will change with us.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we're rooting for it for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, how has the response been to Paradiso so far? I know, Ram, you've been doing some signings, right? And stuff.
Yeah. I was just telling you guys before we started doing this that we had snowfall over the past couple of days in the UK, which is a rare thing, and so everyone kind of freaks out as soon as it comes down. But the cool part was we still had people sort of braving the snow to come into the stores to get their books signed. That's always a good sign. And I always tell people, I swear it's not people that I know. It's just random comic people who brave the weather to get in and get their comics signed. And so I'm always like coming from India and going through that sort of experience of being in a really tiny niche group. I'm always amazed that someone put in the time, effort, and commitment to come down to the store just to get a just get a book signed. So I'm always amazed by that. Most of the stores that we went to were pretty close to selling out post the signings. So
Nice. Yeah.
fingers crossed. Fingers crossed the book's done well.
Fantastic.
Let's see.
Yeah, I always miss the fact that Dave can't make it to the signings because
Yeah,
he's,
I don't really have
but
news on that front. I can't really give you guys. I couldn't make it. Like, first of all, I still am working on the first arc, and
yeah,
deadlines and stuff.
Yeah.
And also, it's a significant investment on my part, and also like me being, it's hard for me to get a visa sometimes. I don't want to risk it unless it's completely sure, because it hampers the chances of going to other countries. So it's a lot of factors.
but Dave's on Twitter, and Twitter is like a
Yeah.
world on its own.
Yeah.
So he does get cool
I do
reactions off.
It's really a nice seeing people react nicely to Paradiso. So yeah, there's that.
Absolutely. Very cool. So obviously, Paradiso is published by Image. What's it been like working with them? From creators we've talked to, and from what we've heard, they're pretty hands off.
Yeah.
Well, with you guys.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been kind of doing most of the interfacing with Image purely because I've written all 4 scripts a while back. So really, my job now is to make sure that everything gets kind of made, if you will. But they're hands off in all the right places, I would say. So I think my biggest experience working with Image has been that if you have a clear vision of what you want to do and a clear idea of how you want to execute a book, that is probably the perfect place, because there's no interference. There's no like, oh, we want you to do this instead of that. They trust you to make a good book. And that's also what I assume what they look at when you pitch to them is not only do you have a great idea, but can you actually execute and make a good book? So that part's been great, but they are very hands-on when it comes to like helping you with PR and sort of reaching out to retailers. I got on a conference call with Comics Pro guys because Image kind of helped me set that up. So I don't think I would have been able to do those things on my own. And so I'm really thankful for that kind of support from Image.
Awesome. Yeah, they were great about helping to set this up. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Bria is awesome. She's done so much work behind PR for this book that I'm always amazed that she's
it's
on
like,
it.
boggles my mind to think like she's doing this much work for us. Like, there's so many Image titles coming out.
Yeah.
I'm already getting tired just thinking about the amount of work she has had to do for us. She has to multiply that by however many titles are coming out, and it's just whoa.
Yeah.
So that's up to her.
Cool. Ron, I guess
Yeah.
move into some process type questions here. I'm curious what approach you have to script writing. What's your method? Index cards or is it Google Docs? What's the meat of your
I'm sort of actually I might have something to show you here. I do like a fairly detailed plot thing. That's what it looks like.
Oh wow, yeah. That's
Yeah, it's got little color coded post-it notes stuck everywhere. But that I kind of plot stuff out that way, and that leads to like a fairly detailed idea of what I want to do in each issue. But once that's done, I kind of keep it aside and never look at it again. And I guess in terms of process, really the only thing is I tend to sort of focus on dialogue and create this document that I call a rambler, if that makes any sense, because it's just me rambling about the script. So there are no descriptions. I put down all the captions, I put down all the narration, I put down all the dialogue, so I can get that sounding like people actually talking to each other and not like written dialogue, if you will.
Sure.
And then once that's done, while I've done that, I've got a fairly good idea of what I want things to look like on every page. So then I'll go in and split up the chunks of dialogue into panels and write down descriptions for those. I know it's a weirdly sort of counterintuitive way of doing it, where you're almost doing it backward. But I think, especially because I'm not the kind of writer who likes to do captions a lot, I feel like my narrative is really driven by dialogue and people talking to each other. So I feel like that's the most important part.
I never noticed that till now, actually. Like you almost never do captions. It's all just dialogue. That's Oh, cool. Typically, that page thing that he showed you, that's the first time I'm seeing that too. I didn't know he did that.
It's mine.
We're all learning something together.
He just sends me the finished script and goes like, "Yeah, I just pulled this out of nowhere. I'm a wizard."
Never let them see you bleed. It was magic. No, sorry.
Yeah.
What's your approach to art like? Do you have particular mediums that you really focus in on? Do you have favorite tools? Is it, do you do the blue pencils into digital, or a little bit about that?
That's actually what I've been debating about lately. Like because I've been using some digital techniques on my stuff from time to time, and it just makes me think about digital linking. But traditionally, like over 95% of what I've done is completely traditional, and I usually use almost anything I can to get the job done, pretty much. Brushes, nibs, and I use the blue pencil. The blue pencil, I didn't figure this out till later, that you can actually completely. I knew that you could do that. I just didn't know how. You could like completely remove the blue pencil, right? And I used to just turn it black and white, and I could still see the blue pencil turn gray. And I'd like, how do I do this? And only much later, like around issue 2 or 3, I think 2, maybe 3, I'm not sure, I realized that you can actually remove the blue pencil. And I'm like, how do I go back through all the pages?
You gotta find all the copies.
But you guys gotta understand, Dave's a self-taught artist, so he's had no sort of formal, oh, this is how you do it, this is how you set up a page kind of thing.
Yeah, I have to learn. Yeah, because I'm self-taught mostly, I had to learn everything by seeing others do stuff, basically. Like I didn't have someone go like, yeah, you do stuff on this side. So even now, sometimes I get the dimensions wrong sometimes. Like the other day, I think in issue 1, before we were sending in the pages, Ram came to me and like, oh, dude, the bleed on this page is weird. I'm like, why? What happened? I'm like, you set the page a bit weird, so like the space is left. So I pulled out my tab and I just drew to bleed and like sent it back to him, and he got it colored in time. So I get stuff like that wrong sometimes, but I just try to get the art right. Like I'm just trying to master the traditional, because I feel like once you get a hold of the traditional stuff, digital gets very easy.
Yeah.
So I was discussing this with a friend of mine. So he was like, yeah, you can also do digital and traditional together, like draw in blue pencils, scan it, and then ink it digitally, or you can do it the other way, just draw it digitally and you can ink over it after you print it out. So I was thinking of expanding, but currently I just use brushes and nibs with ink. It's messy. And
it's kind of cool to watch Dave work. Like last year we'd gone back to one of the conventions in India, and so Dave was doing like commissions and live sketches for people there, and it's almost like watching someone sculpt a page. So he'll just like throw ink on there, and you'll be like, "What are you doing? You're like going out of the lines, man!" So he'll just like, oh, I'm just gonna spill ink all over this page, and they'll go in with like a blade and like a dry brush and just tear it up and use acrylics, and then it ends up looking amazing.
Sure, yeah.
But
it's entertaining to watch him. Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Ram makes it sound like it's almost an artistic process. Like, oh, he throws the ink and he does. I'm just panicking. I throw the ink down and I'm like, oh my God, this doesn't look like anything I wanted to draw. What do I do with it? Then I take some white acrylic and I try to like block out some of the black so I can just do stuff with it. So, yeah, more chaotic than
art by whiteout.
Yeah. Oh, whiteout. I say it.
That's awesome. I always love hearing, everybody seems to have their own sort of technique and process, the way that they get to their end result. It's always cool to hear what that's like.
Yeah, and the thing is like you always like no one can teach you any technique. Like you always come up with your own. No matter how many times someone teaches you a technique, it's not gonna work unless you develop it on your own. It's not gonna stick. I used to emulate a lot of artists when I was young, and I would try to draw like them, but it never really stuck till I started drawing the way I was comfortable. So that's something you learn as you go along.
Awesome. So I'm curious about the sort of responsibility split between you two. Do you dictate any character design elements, Ram, or do you have any hand in narrative, Dave, or is it pretty solid split there?
Oh no, there's a very like equal sharing of the burden over there, as he does the scripts, but we always discuss the layouts together. And sometimes when the pressure keeps going, he does the layouts for me, and then we sit and discuss it. Because layouts are basically like the idea of the page, right?
Sure.
So what I'll do is I'll keep going on to inks, and he'll be like, "Yeah, okay, I had this idea for this page," and I'm like, "Okay, let's sit down and discuss it." So it's a very back and forth between us. Because otherwise, I don't think Paradiso would work out as well. Because
I feel like the script and the layouts are just blueprints for what you're trying to do, and it doesn't mean that you need to absolutely stick to them.
Yeah.
Especially as you sort of become comfortable with each other as collaborators, you have to kind of make room for that coincidence, for that sort of impulsive attempt at doing something, and you have to make room for that to lead you to an interesting end. So sometimes, as Dave said, especially with character designs and stuff, like I came in with a pretty firm idea of what I wanted, but then I would give that to Dave, and he would come back and he would have added things that weren't there in the design, and then we'll look at it and go, well, that actually looks really cool. Like especially with so we're calling him Laserface, the guy who shows up on page 2 with all the tubes on his face. So we had an idea for that design that I sent over, but when Dave came back, he had added like this weird sort of central element to his face. Originally, he was supposed to have no face and just sort of a circle of tubes, if you will. But we were like, okay, so Dave, you have to explain what that is. And we talked about it, and we came up with an idea for what that central thing was. And now it's become an important part of the story. So I like how like I came in with an idea, sent it to him, and then he got back, and now that's influenced what the original idea was. So that kind of call and response stuff happens a lot, and so that relationship is pretty fluid. We're not super structured in terms of no, this is your job, this is my job.
Yeah, like we don't have we don't. I remember there were some designs where it was like we had to go back and forth a lot. But even in those times, it was never like Ram screaming at me like, "No, you have to do it like this. This is what I want. Do it that." No, he was more like, "No, this is what I have in mind for this. Do you think that works?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll try to see what I can come up with." I would give him some options. He would give me some options, and then we would keep going around till we both were like, "Okay, this works."
The only time I ever scream is when I'm in utter panic from deadlines. And that's just me generally screaming. I'm not screaming at anyone. I'm just being like, ah!
Sounds quite a bit more collaborative than a lot of artist-writer duos we've had.
I mean, part of why I got into comics was that, and I believe, and I've said this to people before, and it's a really cheesy thing to say, but I feel like making a good comic is like being in a band.
Sure.
And so like you have to get along with your band members, and you have to kind of make room for someone to go off on like a 16-minute drum solo sometimes, but that's part of the process, and that's part of being like the band that you are. And so if you lose that, it's just boring. Then it's just you're a musician who goes and plays with some other musicians, and you don't really enjoy it.
Very cool. So I feel like there's a lot of sci-fi coming out these days between comics and television. How do you work to create a world that feels fresh and like grabs a reader's attention right away?
A lot of it is through like consciously being aware of what else is there around you. I mean, people always say that, you know, to be a good writer or a good artist, you have to consume a lot of writing and art. And not like part of that is of course to learn from what you're consuming, but also the other part of it is also to know what's out there. So the more you've consumed of what's out there, the more capable you are of actually doing something original, if that makes sense. A lot of people, I know a lot of people say that, oh, I don't read something in case it
It's kind
influences
of
me.
stupid.
Yeah, but I'm like, no, it'll have quite the opposite effect, because there have been so many times where we've done character designs or we've like thought of concepts. So Paradiso was originally conceived with another friend of mine. He's an architect called Rajiv. So he helped conceptualize the idea behind the project as well. And every time I've talked with him or I've talked with Dave, there have always been times where we went, oh yeah, that looks cool. And then one of us goes, but wait, that looks too much like that other thing we saw in that other comic. We don't want to do that. And so you're pushing yourself constantly to not sort of emulate other things, even if you're doing that by accident. And when you do that, when you push yourself to be original, you will be original.
Like subconsciously you have that. You like, even if you think you're original, subconsciously you'll always be like, you'll always make something and you won't even realize what you've drawn inspiration from something that influences you, right? So you always have to keep an eye out for that. And so how we work with that, how we make this world different is like what Ram said. We try to take influences, but like consciously separate the places we took influences from. For example, the city itself, I took a lot of influence from Neo Tokyo, and there's this island off of the south coast of Japan. There's this island called Island of Hashima. It was like I think an industrial area that had a residential space built, like full of buildings, as Japan does. And then it was evacuated. Like no one ever lived there. They built it, but no one ever lived there. So it fell into complete disrepair. And that was one of the very integral influences for Paris. Like completely built but desolate for some reason. You don't know why. It's just empty. So that was one of the biggest influences. And I knew for a fact that not many people knew about this. And it was just the perfect confluence of like, yeah, it's going to be unique, and it perfectly meshes with what I want to do. So it served my purpose for making it a very unique world. And we also discussed the ideas. For example, the Aquarius point. I felt like that was one of a very unique design, if you, as you say, design in the world. We discussed it at length. That page was crazy. I made a layout for the whole thing, and then we scrapped it because it didn't show off the grandeur of the place. I made all the buildings and everything in blue line, because at that point I didn't know how blue lines worked. I would like pencil, like with a normal pencil. I would just detail everything in. I have a better grasp of blue lines now. But I did the whole thing in blue, and then Ram and I were sitting, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't work. We have to do it again. And then Ram and me sat back and we discussed how the architecture of it works.
Like, that page is really interesting because it kind of really points out what you guys were talking about. Yeah, how do you try to be original? So we had a concept for it, and we knew we wanted to make this like giant transport conduit going through, and it's so huge that people are now living in the sort of train tracks, if you will. And the way we made that original was to go back. Once we had the idea, I remember talking to Rajiv going, okay, you're an architect. Potentially, if you were to build this at some point, if you could possibly have the materials and the manpower and the ability to build this at some point, what would it look like? And you see a lot of actual architectural elements that have gone into that page, like the buttresses at the bottom and the shape of the track and the fact that the buildings are built into the side of the walls. So these are things that are fairly original because they're not inspired by other fiction. They're inspired by actual architectural study.
So. Good point. Taking from real world, nobody can really fault you for that.
No.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, my background as a scientist helps. I used to be a chemical engineer. I understand sort of specialty materials and such. So there's a lot of sort of science references in there that like I actually know what I'm talking about. So my biggest sort of gripe with science fiction is when I can find something, look at it and go, nah, that's not possible at all, because you're just breaking science at that point. I think good science fiction sort of plays with and agrees with a lot of the science that we have right now, but sort of extrapolates it to being cool.
Absolutely. Instead of a sci-fi world that's kind of explaining things via, well, it's just sci-fi magic, you actually have some ground.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, exactly.
That
Exactly.
actually leads well into sort of the next question I have. I take it you do sort of have internal rules built out for this world in terms of world building of the technology.
Oh, yeah.
It almost seems magical in a sense. So
Yeah.
Sort of written that all out then at this point.
Yeah, there's very plausible explanations for all the crazy stuff that you're seeing.
I see you fishing for a spoiler.
I'm not gonna give any of it away because a lot of it is related to how the story functions and how the story works. Like if the sci-fi was just like an ornamental aspect of it, then it wouldn't be any fun. So it actually builds into why things work the way they work. So I will say this: the next arc has space vampires, and I have a perfectly logical reason why space vampires exist.
Wow. I dig that.
Not ridiculous at all. At all. Also, there's this one thing. Oh no, go ahead.
You can continue.
There's this one thing I'm really excited about. Is like there's this part of the story where like two robots fight each other, and they're like pretty badass robots.
Sweet.
So yeah, I'm not going to give anything away, but I'm pretty excited for that.
Is it fair to say Paradiso will go in a lot of different sci-fi directions then?
Yeah, that's something we wanted to do. Like with each arc, we wanted to take like a different sort of refresh the lens through which you're telling the story. So like the first arc, a lot of people will notice it has a very sort of Mad Max vibe to it. The second arc will have a sort of space vampires vibe to it. The next arc is gonna be like there's a dream world arc, which is you might look at as an homage to Sandman kind of thing. So same characters, same story being told through parts of the city that inspire different kind of storytelling each time, which I think ties into how cities work. Like cities mean different things to different people, and they feel different depending on where you live.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's super exciting. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be experimenting with some different lenses and stuff. I think before we wrap it out, how long do you see Paradiso running? Do you have it, and how far out are you plotting?
I don't do the kind of detailed plotting outside of the arc that I'm writing, but I do know what each arc does in terms of the overall story.
Sure.
And I do know all the sort of important places that my characters need to get to in the storyline. And most importantly, I know how it ends. So with that in mind, it's a pretty badass ending. With that in mind, if I say so myself.
Right.
So with that in mind, we've said right now that we'd like to do sort of 4, maybe 5 volumes with 4 issues each. So around 20 issues, 16 to 20 issues is what we're looking at.
Very cool. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? Anything you've been like watching or reading lately that you just think is so awesome you got to tell people about?
Yeah, so I'm part of a writer's studio called White Noise back in the UK. I work with a couple of writers, Ryan O'Sullivan, Dan Waters, and Alex Packnadel. Ryan O'Sullivan has a book called Void Trip out with Image right now, which is also a pretty cool sort of space hobos stoner road trip through space kind of deal with that going on. So I think that's pretty cool. Apart from that, apart from that, I read a lot of Hickman. I read a lot of sort of Black Monday Murders. So
Yeah.
I think you can see. I think you can see, like, hopefully you can see things that are inspired by that style of storytelling in Paradiso as well.
But you, Dave?
For me, I don't really have time to do much. Like what I usually do is just it's
Get back
hard.
to the basement, Dave.
Yeah, we hear that from Arnold.
Whenever I get free time, like lately I've been on a turn-based strategy game kick. So like whenever I get free time, I just load it up because you don't need. It's not like a first-person shooter. You don't need to go in and play. It's a turn-based game, so you just let it sit there and you can relax. Yeah, you can just relax. Just be like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So it's a bit relaxing. So I do those a lot. Like I don't know if you know Darkest Dungeon. I've been playing Darkest Dungeon. Battlefield. Darkest Dungeon is fucking nuts. Sorry, crazy dude.
Yeah.
Like,
You can bleep that out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm at a point where I have like 50,000 cash, and I have a pretty badass crew, and I'm not turning that game on because I don't want them to die.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I'm not gonna play you. I see what you're doing. You're gonna kill off all my level 3 people. So yeah. So that, and I don't have a lot of time to like read a lot of stuff, but whenever I do, I just go over, some of John Arcudi's BPRD run because I love horror, and also James Aaron's work is pretty spectacular. So I go over those, and I also go over some of the older Wolverine, Marvel stuff, things I used to love that I have on my hard drive, and just read comics in general to relax a bit, I guess. But yeah, other than that, just drawing.
Yeah.
Deadlines.
Well, I guess we'll say thank you guys so much. We're really looking forward to the second issue. Paradiso.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah. Paradiso #1's out now. Round V and Demela Prominent.
Just Davis fine.
Prominent.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
I know, right?
Very excited.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks for having
It was really cool to see you.
Thanks for having us. That was a good one.
Awesome.
Good night, guys.
Take it easy, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers.